Brought to you by Charity Mobile, the phone company that supports life and family. 5% of your monthly plan price goes to your favorite charity. Buy the way you believe at CharityMobile.com and use promo code TRADITION.
We should not be surprised when we see the politicization of major events in the life of the church by those outside the church who hate the church, or those on paper inside the church who openly advocate for great evils the church condemns, to the point where it's pretty clear we're talking about heretics. And that's what we're talking about in the latter. Last week I told you the story of how the Italian stonecutters decided to write a eulogy for Pope Francis. And they cited quite a lot of the things that myself and people like me have reported on this and similar platforms over the years as his great offenses against the Catholic faith. Except they celebrated these acts. They celebrated Fratelli Tutti, the document issued in 2019 after the Pan-Amazon Synod, where he invoked the stonecutter language of liberty, equality, and fraternity, that great rallying cry of the French Revolution and the great rallying cry of the stonecutters, because of the same thing. They cited these things and numerous others, including his religious indifferentism, his lukewarmness, his telling people not to evangelize in any meaningful way, as all were cited by them as positives. That's a subtle, or not terribly subtle, message to a future pontiff, to those men at the College of Cardinals who are vying to be the replacement, the next Roman pontiff. Many of them will pick up on that message. And the same here is coming from this politician. You might remember a certain senator named Tim Kaine. He ran for vice president in 2016 as the vice president to Hillary Rodham Clinton. And much to everybody's surprise, and many of us were quite thankful to see, she did not become president and he did not become vice president. Tim Kaine is a Catholic. And he is letting the world know what real Catholicism in his mind looks like. This comes from the Richmond Times-Dispatch under the headline, Tim Kaine, Pope Francis stood for the least of these, so should we. This is Senator Kaine letting the world know that Francis was the best. That this is the Democratic Party with a public approval rating right now of about 19% in the United States, if you can believe it, chiming in on how Francis is a much needed breath of fresh air in the church. And there is a message embedded in this, a very clear one, as you will see. Let's turn to the story, begin going over it so you can see what I'm saying and the message that they are sending. And let me know in the comments if you see the message that they are trying to send. From the article, quote, when the news broke in March 2013 that Argentine Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio had been elected Pope by the College of Cardinals in Rome, my heart soared. As a Catholic who worked with Jesuit missionaries in Honduras in 1980 to 81, the prospect of the first Latin American and first Jesuit assuming the papacy was like a beam of sunlight penetrating the church I love. And when he assumed the name Pope Francis, the first pope to model after St. Francis of Assisi, I knew his leadership would prove distinct and special. The news of his death Monday morning was no surprise. His battle with pneumonia at age 88 was painful to witness, and the fact that he had already lost part of a lung decades ago left him little margin in his final fight. But there were beautiful surprises in how fully he lived his last days, ministering to prisoners on Holy Thursday, spending an hour with the faithful in St. Peter's Square on Easter Sunday, and delivering a final powerful sermon promoting peace and reminding all of the Easter message. We were not made for death, but for life. There were many unforgettable moments in Pope Francis's remarkable tenure. His simple response when asked about a priest of the James Martin type, "Who am I to judge?" sent a message of love and acceptance to the James Martin crowd around the globe. His exhortation that Catholic hierarchy should smell like the flock summed up his frequent critiques of any leaders who tried to lift themselves above others. His elevation of women to key roles within the church was long overdue. His advocacy for fighting the thermometer problem, grounded in environmental ethic and good stewardship of God's creation, and his persistent focus on serving the poor, sick, oppressed, and war-weary marked his papacy as the most compassionate in my lifetime. End quote. So you see, Francis was a great pope because he adhered to a progressive materialistic program. Did you hear anywhere in there about Francis's devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary? No, you did not. For those who aren't exactly big fans of Pope Francis, like myself, to be perfectly blunt about it, it was at least nice to see him pay at least lip service to the Blessed Virgin Mary the way he sometimes did. No mention of that there. This senator, who is a putative Catholic, was celebrating Francis for promoting the progressive political program. Take all the time you need to really wrap your head around that in light of the Catholic Charities financial scandals and the USAID and Doge financial scandals of the past 6 months or so. None of this should surprise anyone. This was a message being sent to the College of Cardinals, who are going to be meeting very soon to choose the successor to Pope Francis and the next Roman pontiff. Back to the article. Quote, Pope Francis addressed Congress in 2015 and told the stories of American heroes Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Merton, Dorothy Day, and Martin Luther King Jr. 2 were Catholic and 2 were not. None was perfect, but God used each to advance our nation and our common humanity. The Pope reminded us that day of our common responsibility to the least of these, focusing particularly on the needs of refugees fleeing violence and starvation. And he also reminded us that the yardstick we use to judge others will be the same used to measure our own actions. I traveled to the Vatican in 2017 to meet Pope Francis and engage in dialogue and church leadership about the worldwide refugee problem. He addressed a crowd in St. Peter's Square and then worked his way down a line of visitors placed around his altar. I was the last one in line, and when he reached me, I addressed him in Spanish, and we talked about refugees as a constant across history and how we could treat them with compassion. As we finished our conversation, he gave me a rosary, and switching to English, he said, "Pray for me." It seemed an admission that the tasks before him were too great, but that prayers of the faithful might inspire God's grace to allow him to succeed. Recently, Pope Francis declared 2025 a Jubilee year and asked us to become pilgrims of hope. We are all pilgrims on the way to a better place, but not yet there. The Church, for all its strength, still has so many faults, as befits any human institution, and so much is destined to travel, but we must be on the journey toward hope. End quote. Well, let's bring your attention to this. The Church, for all its strength, still has many faults, as befits any human institution. The words of a Catholic who was a senator. The Catholic Church is not a human institution. The Catholic Church was established by Jesus Christ. It was true God and true man. It is a divine institution with a human element. And that human element are the bishops and the priests and the cardinals and popes and men and women religious and you and I. That's the imperfect part, but it's not a human institution. To call it a human institution means that you are calling the Catholic Church the work of human hands. And the work of human hands is the devil, or the creation of diabolical things. So says the Church throughout its history until fairly recently. The Church is not the work of human hands. Faults within the Church are the product of human action. They are the product of the human element failing in its duties. But the mystical bride of Christ is spotless, regardless of what heretics among the laity or bad bishops, priests, and popes do to it. Spotless bride of Christ is spotless and will remain spotless. I wish that senator, who is allegedly Catholic, would understand this. But his entire praising of Pope Francis was for the false materialist gospel of the modernists, promoted these days most loudly by Jesuits, but plenty of others do it too. That the gospel requires us to do works, and it does require us to do works. Our Lord makes that pretty clear in the Gospels. But conflating the Gospels with a work your way to salvation, create a better world thing is just a Protestant parody of Catholicism. And that's what the modernists have done to the Catholic Church. They have taken all the Protestant critiques of Catholicism and brought them into reality. We're required by our Lord tells us to do works because they're a measure of our love. But plenty of works are spiritual in nature. And at the end of the day, we're called to do those works in obedience to God and as a sign of our love of neighbor. As you have loved them, so you love me, our Lord tells us. But unfortunately, all that's lost on Senator Tim Kaine, who should not, and that shouldn't surprise anybody. If you've ever watched that guy give a speech, if you watched those debates 10 years ago in that presidential election cycle, you know you're not dealing with the brightest bulb on the Christmas tree anyway. I'm curious, what do you think about this? You surprised that they are using him now for partisan purposes? Let me know your thoughts on this in the comments, please. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't. Certainly helps. Sharing this on social media helps a lot too. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.